I find it troubling. I often come to this committee and I often find that the Auditor General is yelling at the top of her lungs about the conditions that are often facing Indigenous and Black people in Canada. And these systems continuously stay the same. I'm an MP that actually went and visit people in these penitentiaries. I went to the Edmonton Women's Penitentiary and asked them what their needs were, and they're great. And I'm hearing my colleagues ask questions, and obviously being a Crown prosecutor doesn't give you a kind of education that would be necessary to understand the conditions of Indigenous people and how they get up to that place. Because this is not an Indigenous and Black issue. This is a Canadian justice issue. It's an issue of our justice system, not of the individuals to which they fail. The residential school system, the 60s scoop, the planned targeting and genocide of Indigenous women. It's clear. And this isn't me saying this. This isn't even many Indigenous people who've been saying this. I want to give light to the words of Auditor General. A quote from just today. And I hope all members will pay attention to this really important piece. I'm looking at my Conservative colleagues in particular, that they listen to the important pieces that this has to offer, because I often hear them talk about get tough on crime without understanding the people that they're getting tough on and why they're there. She says, quote, "This is our fourth audit since 2015 that shows poor and worsening outcomes for different groups of offenders. CSC has taken little concrete action to change the seemingly neutral policies, procedures, and practices that produce these outcomes. CSC acknowledged in November of 2020 that this systemic racism is present in the correctional system. It's long overdue that CSC remove the systemic barriers identified in this report. These are real people. Why is it taking so long to address what is the very basic human rights of people? I had to look these women in the eyes and tell them that I was going to try to do better for them. It's tremendously difficult. And the member from Edmonton West, that penitentiary is right in your backyard, the Edmonton Women's Penitentiary. And I asked them, I don't care if you've been there, I'm wondering if you've listened to them. And they're asking for help. The conditions in those prisons are terrible. I've spoken to the elders who assist there, and they're overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. One elder, hundreds of people they're asked to serve. And to the commissioner, I don't know how to put this in any other way, but these people aren't all the same either. We have one federal penitentiary for Indigenous women in the entire prairies. From Winnipeg to Saskatchewan to Alberta, they're all lined up in one penitentiary and dropped off in my community of Edmonton-Griesba, where they find themselves houseless. They find themselves without support and are forced into crimes of desperation and exploitation. Our systems are failing them, simply, especially CSC. I am lost for words. The reports are there, the numbers are there, and all I can do is ask that we see these people for who they are and the conditions that they're in. They're not there because they want to be there. They're there because this country has forced them to be there. Whether it's because they've taken their children, who have spoken to elders who are in the maximum security prison there, old women who've been there for decades, because they fought for a desperation to find their children and failed in doing that. And the first question I asked them when they were there was, can you help me find my daughter? This is real people who are missing their family members, and they can't even go visit them because they're from Winnipeg and their daughters are missing and they want to talk to their family. This is one of the most egregious reports I've seen. And these people can't wait. They're going to die in this place without ever seeing their family again. We need to help these people. They're not there because of reasons within their control. And I'll probably run out of time in this segment to ask any questions, but I hope that you see how real this is. It's taken people like me to get elected to get this message all the way to this place, because I haven't heard it once yet. And I hope my colleagues can see the need to reframe our minds on this. We need a policy in Canada that reforms these systems away from the simple slogan of get tough on crime, because that contributes to genocide in this country. Yes, people who break the law should be punished. But those who find themselves in conditions because of what Canadians have done, you need to do some reflection. How have Canadian laws disproportionately impacted these people? My relatives. Those Gladue reports are important pieces of information. And hope Crown prosecutors also do their work in understanding the value of those reports when seeking so desperately to put our people in jail. It's important that we do this work. It's called by elders who passed away now. The calls to action in the TRC are clear. And in my continued statements later on, I'll ask about the TRC and what you've done. I do want to thank my colleagues on both sides for what I think is a very important questioning and your patience for what is a very difficult study for me. I've been on the opposite end of this for a long time, and I have only seen it get worse. You can call it what you want, you can say improvements are being made, but the reality is you made an important statement, Commissioner, that the number is increasing. And I don't necessarily believe the correction services is to blame. I believe, like many Indigenous folks, that this is a holistic problem that will require a holistic solution, and you made mention of that in your remarks, and I appreciate that. But I also recognize is that your department has also accepted this in the past. Absent from me being here, your predecessor sat here and agreed 3 times to the Auditor General's recommendations to make things better. The TRC has now been out for a long time, since your entire appointment, and I'm sure the gentleman with you as well. They probably, I'm not even sure if you've even read it, and that's the question I'd like to know, is what is your literacy in terms of the TRC? Do you know what the Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action number 35 is? Larry, perhaps?
Well, not specifically number 35. I'm well aware of some of the recommendations and
okay, what about Alan? Do you know what 35 is?
Yes. So for us, it's around correctional programs. It's around healing and a holistic approach. It's around Section 81 healing lodges because it's seen as a barrier. It's the
Commissioner, why doesn't your colleagues know what that is when it's the one core mandate of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for your department? How is it that this isn't the central piece to your work when 70% of Indigenous people are incarcerated and under your charge? How is it that at this level you come to a committee where a study on Indigenous incarceration, the overrepresentation of Indigenous people, and your senior bureaucrats don't know what I'm talking about? Can you admit that that's a failure in how we need to actually see Indigenous people need to have trust and need to be able to see that the officials in charge of these systems care? And when I hear things like that, you have to share in my disappointment. What I'm hearing is that we care about this issue, all of us, and I really hope, I really, really, really hope we don't have to return to this audit again in the way it is. And that is more than a challenge, that's a demand. Because it's a demand of just basic morality. Basic levels of understanding of this issue that I still don't have confidence that CSC has. The cultural competency from the top to do this work correctly. And that is why so many Indigenous people feel neglected, not heard. And I want to know what actions you've taken to educate your own selves about the history of this country. You spoke at great length and mentioned it 6 or 7 times now, this Indigenous social history. And I made remarks at the very beginning to clarify that this is not an Indigenous or Black problem. This is a Canadian problem. How we think of fellow human beings. And the TRC is clear about many of these outcomes. And I just wish 5 minutes, read it, 5 minutes. Memorize it. Because people have died for those things. Just 5 minutes. There's not that many. There's 7 calls to action for your department. 7 calls to action. I need confidence today that when I leave this room, that you're going to do something about your own learning. That you're going to make efforts to rebuild that trust. I might not be here forever. You might be able to wait me out. But I'd hope that you can remember this for as long as you possibly can in your service to Canadians, that these are real people too, and they deserve a chance. Do you know the history of this country well enough to understand why these people are in the position they are in? And if not, that's okay. We can help. The government benches here, the opposition will support. What resources do you need to change this? Do you know the history of colonization in this country?
Yes, I would say we do, and I would also say we care. We care. We care about ensuring that the offenders that come into our custody, that we offer them what they require so they don't return to custody. Because if they return to custody, for us, that's a failure. We want them to stay in the community. That's why we have National Elders Working Group. That's why we have national advisory, Indigenous advisory committees that provide advice to me. That's why I invite all of you to come into our institutions to see what is happening.
I have, and that's the problem, Commissioner. They're worse. They're not working. I'm telling you, Indigenous people are being left behind, and something needs to change. It needs to change at the top. And if you don't believe you have the resources to do this job, we need to know. And I need to know that there's confidence that you have, that you understand the issue well. And I told you again, this isn't a matter of blaming people, it's a matter of understanding. There's a failure here. We're talking about the failure of your department. We're not talking about the success of your department. We're talking about the abject and overt objective failure. Not that I'm saying this. The Auditor General, the top independent office in this country, has told you failed. Many, many, many times over. And there needs to be confidence. I need that. Indigenous people need that, to know that these systems aren't a sham. That you can contract a university to do the work that should be done by Indigenous community members. I don't have to talk about that today, but something I hope you take seriously. That community members are the ones who know best. And the TRC, if you'd read it, actually says that. Call to Action 37 makes explicit note that it doesn't say consult with the universities, it doesn't say consult with the government, it doesn't say consult with other persons. It says that, or sorry, not 37, 36, or sorry, 38, that you need to find ways to do that.
Thank
Consult
you.
directly with community members.